Good evening. My name is Gary Tardikoff, and as soon as I find the wire that connects me with the slide projector, I'll be back. What I'm going to talk about this evening is the ideal and the real, the art of Salentanami, Nicaragua. And you see an example of that kind of painting in the slide behind me and all the way around on the walls. There are two main meanings we give to works of art. There are lots of other meanings. You can think of art is like love. You can find many, many different ways valuably to define it. But the two main meanings are those specific things an artist wants to say, and you'll see some of that when you read the labels on the pieces. Almost all of them are called Salentanami one way or another. They're pictures of the islands that these artists live on. And so that title or the specific intent is there. There's one image at the back, which is actually a religious one. The people of Salentanami first became famous outside of Nicaragua for doing religious paintings. But there's a nice baptism of Jesus with John the Baptist at the exact opposite end for me, the one with the two large figures in it, which a lot of you recognize already. But most of these are landscapes. Two kinds of art. The meaning that a specific individual will give to a particular piece, whatever the Mona Lisa is smiling about, all right, that's a beautiful picture of a young woman. There's also the general cultural meaning we take from it. We look at the Mona Lisa and we think of the Italian Renaissance and all of the variety of meanings that go with that, Leonardo da Vinci, the development of Western humanism. In that general way, and that's what I'm going to talk about most tonight, these images from Salentanami, done in the last couple of years, all of them within the last 2 or 3 years probably, they represent an ongoing process that began with the Nicaraguan Revolution of the 1970s and 80s. Something that many of the people in this room are old enough to remember, having lived through it in the newspapers and on television in different ways. It's part of our history. It's one of the things we often forget about, how much what's going on right now really is history, really is important. I was just checking on a name as I was thinking about this. How many of you know who John Negroponte is? All right. He's the one right now who's the ambassador from the State Department. He was our man in the UN for a while. He's now the one who's going to Pakistan to talk to General Musharraf from the United States, from the Bush administration, because they don't want General Musharraf to be too much of a dictator in Pakistan. We're trying to spread democracy. Do any of you remember John Negroponte's previous famous incarnation in the U.S. news? Jeff, could you say what it was? Do you remember what he was? It wasn't Nicaragua. I'm not sure he was ambassador. He was in El Salvador, as I remember. But you all remember the name of the Iran-Contra affair that got several members of President Reagan's administration indicted before he was able to pardon them at the end of his rule. Negroponte was the man in El Salvador who ran the Contra War. It was contra-revolutionary. When the Sandinista front, when the guerrillas overthrew the Somoza dictatorship in Nicaragua in the middle of the 1970s, the U.S. funded a group of the soldiers of the former dictator Somoza to go back into the country and try to retake it. The Somoza dictatorship was installed by the U.S. government way back in the 30s and was still going on. He was our dictator in Nicaragua. He was overthrown by people who identified themselves as communists. Therefore, the United States funded the Contras and did a number of things to try to get rid of them. Well, that's interesting in a way. One of the ways that it still affects us is, the United States doesn't submit itself to the World Court. There's a reason for that. One of the reasons, there are probably a number, but one of the reasons is we're the only nation ever convicted by the World Court or any major international organization of terrorism. The United States was convicted by the World Court in, in The Hague, for terrorism, for acts committed illegally against international law and even against American law in funding the Contras in their war against the government of Nicaragua, once Somoza had been overthrown. Eventually, that government worked itself toward an election. In the election, the U.S. favored candidates won, and Daniel Ortega, who was running for president, and the Sandinistas had to give up office. And the U.S. had promised a lot of aid to Nicaragua. The aid didn't happen, really. And if you've been following the news, you'll notice Daniel Ortega is now once again president of Nicaragua. So if the Sandinista revolution didn't win and overwhelm and become the only thing that's happened in Nicaragua since the 1970s, they did push out the Somoza dictatorship. They did bring democracy and the beginnings of democracy, a crude kind of democracy, to Nicaragua, and it's developing, and maybe even the socialism that they were trying to push there has gone on developing. Now, the reason for talking about all of that, for me, is that's the background for these paintings. Even though you don't see guerrillas hiding in the underbrush, and you don't see political posters, these paintings are one of the outcomes and part of the ongoing history of Nicaragua. On your left, or my far right in the corner, there's a picture of John Brentlinger. John's the one who selected these pictures, and it's because of John that they're here today. It's partially because of John that they're being made, not entirely. He's became a kind of revolutionary art dealer. He wasn't making any money out of it. It was his contribution, though, to the Nicaraguan revolution. Revolution not in the sense of a coup, but in the sense of a society transforming itself, right? Something that's ongoing, hopefully to get to a better place. During the 1970s and 80s, John went down to Nicaragua every year and interviewed lots of people. And on that table is the book he produced, The Best of What We Are, about what he learned interviewing campesinos and some of campesinas and some of the officials in the Nicaraguan government, trying to understand. A gringo philosophy professor from Massachusetts, going down to this Central American country to figure out what they were doing, to see if he could understand it, to see if he could participate in what he hoped would be a better Nicaragua that was growing. The other thing on that table, there are some little tortoises and birds, as well as the kind of painting you see here. They also do a little bit of sculpture in Salento Name. And as you know, these paintings are all for sale, and the price list is over there on the wall. Those little green cards you can pick up and take a look at. They'll be up until the first day or two of January. The prices are very reasonable. And the profit, except for a little bit of overhead to pay for this room and the university's display and the advertising and so on, except for that, all of the profits go back to Nicaragua to buy more paintings and to help the collective of artists of Salento Name grow, and to help them in their attempts to bring their children education, to feed themselves, and so on. John went down every year. He was teaching philosophy and Marxism at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, which is a land-grant institution like ISU. In fact, it was the land-grant institution created just before ISU. They're in 1-2 in the list of land-grant institutions that were created in the United States. John went down to see what was happening. He interviewed a lot of people, and I would recommend the book. It's in the library here at Iowa State. It's also in the Ames Public Library if you'd like to see a copy of it, or you can get it on Amazon or from a used book dealer. He was working on another book when he died. John just died this past March. The book he was working on was about what people like us, what North Americans relate to Nicaragua like today. Let me move through these pictures a little bit. After talking a little bit about this social background, I will go back to the pictures and talk a little bit about how these marks get to be the way they are. But there's a little bit of a map. If you go right as far as you can go, you probably get to northern Missouri. You know, Iowa's just above that, and Nicaragua is down here in Central America. You notice the large lake in the middle of Nicaragua. As someone was reminding me, the Panama Canal is actually one of two routes that were talked of at the time, and it's still brought up once in a while, the possibility of breaking through Lake Nicaragua for another path from the Atlantic into the Pacific. That large lake running through the west of the country. Here's another map done by the painters of Solentiname, Nicaragua, the orange part at the top, and then the islands themselves down at the bottom. There are about 35 islands in the Solentiname chain. They're at the south of the lake. It's a freshwater lake. It's got the only freshwater sharks, apparently anywhere. It was once part of the ocean, and volcanic eruptions cut it off, leaving you a lake. And as it desalinated, the sharks adjusted. So there are freshwater sharks, and you can swim with them. They don't eat people. They're small sharks. At least that's what John claimed, and he kept swimming with them, so he must have known something. One thing I remember from the discussions we used to have about Nicaragua during the Contra War against it in the early 80s here, Nicaragua is almost exactly the same size as Iowa. That's Solentiname picture of the Big Island. Pretty much jungle and fields in the center. The habited area where houses are all around the outside edge. In the middle 60s, a priest from Nicaragua, a man named Ernesto Cardenal, won a poetry prize with a good deal of money and used the money to buy 100 acres on one of the islands in the Solentiname chain, where he and friends built a church. Actually, they found a half-finished church. Maybe that's how he chose the area. They finished building the church, and he started into what we now call, and was called soon after that, liberation theology. Reading the Gospels with the peasants and applying what they learned to their own situation. What if this was right now? Who would Jesus be if he was here? Somoza, the dictator, was compared to Herod, and in this way they discussed. And there's a book about Cardinals. I don't know, there are 30 of Cardinal's books in our library, so you can imagine there are a lot around. He was a poet, and he was part of the Sandinista collective, and he was the Minister of Culture for some time. In any case, before the revolution, as they were working towards it, as there were guerrillas in the hillside, as there were people talking against and writing about Somoza, Cardinal was talking with the peasants in Solentiname, and he published a book of their discussions around the Gospels. As the revolution heated up and became a shooting war, several people from the islands actually took part. That's Cardinal's house. He's still there writing his memoirs. I think he's into volume 4. In any case, several people from the islands actually took part in a military attack on the barracks in San Carlos, the nearest city. And there were deaths on the island. The islands themselves were strafed by planes. People in this revolution, many of them died. It was a desperate time. And Cardinal, being an active figure, even though he was a priest, and against violence, he was a priest as part of this government, and eventually forced to leave the priesthood by the papacy because he wouldn't leave the Sandinista government. He brought this liberation theology. People had to come from various islands. They didn't walk to church. You have to go by boat from island to island to get there. And they didn't have motorboats. Some of them had to paddle to get there. He brought them a kind of spiritual sustenance. He also brought them some kinds of material sustenance. There's San Carlos, where the barracks was attacked. And here's the front part of Cardinal's church. Okay. You can see the paintings on the wall. Some of the local people started doing paintings, either because of an artist he brought with him or just because they were interested in it. And some gave paintings to Cardinal, who then sold them through dealers, galleries, someplace in Managua, in the capital of Nicaragua, and brought back more materials. And more people got interested, and over time, they brought in some artists to teach people, and a style of painting was developed. Well, for them, it was what we would call handicraft. People could sell those small sculptures or paintings they did, and they came from Solentiname. Someone published a book, which I have never seen, which is the gospel according to the artists of Salentinami, religious paintings like the Baptism of Christ, which is in the back there. I haven't seen the book, and I'm looking forward to. I've ordered it. In any case, what they were looking for was a way of trying to support themselves. They were living in subsistence agriculture, and really a bare subsistence. There are 35 islands in the Salentinami chain. Only 10 of them are big enough and really have many inhabitants, but it's a very poor subsistence. And this kind of painting, which they could sell, once in a while now to tourists who come by, the great tourist hotels will actually send people to visit these islands and to visit this artist collective, which has gotten some fame. Cardinal is still there on his island. He holds seminars and does a variety of things. There's a little museum where people can visit and learn a little bit about the Sandinistas and what had happened locally during the revolution. But in any case, he brought painting materials and encouraged people and whole families. It didn't go like you go to art school and become a painter. One person did it, people in their family did it. Most of the artists in Salentinami, if you'll look at the names as you go by or on the price list, are women, which is interesting. And they started selling them. They sold them in town. John Brentlinger, as I said, did this book about the revolution in Nicaragua, trying to understand it. He was interested in it from a leftist point of view. He didn't belong to the Sandinista Communist Party. He was a North American. But he went down there to see what it was. He wanted to know what socialism would be. John's activities in the U.S. and down there were around things like collectives and cooperatives, the ways people can join together economically. Cardinal had formed or helped the people in Salentinami form an artist collective. And as Cardinal withdrew from political and the life around him to write, John sort of stepped in, not officially gaining something, but helping these people with their collective. As he joined the food cooperative in Northampton, Massachusetts, he was helping out the collective down there. His thing would be to buy paintings from them and then bring them back to Massachusetts, where they sold them through churches, 4 or 5 different churches. They would have fairs and do different things. And then the money would go back. We went with John about 4 years ago on New Year's week to help paint the school. But the money that they've been making through these paintings, they were just barely subsisting at all. And people would have to leave the islands to earn money and come back just so they could go on living there. They actually could own farms, which few people in Nicaragua can do. In any case, but the painting allowed them to not only build a school, but to employ a full-time teacher for the first time. And they were educating their children. The people in the collective in Massachusetts, Western Mass, that has stayed on after John, he formed a group of people, he didn't do it all by himself, selling these paintings. They bring doctors there every year or so. They brought people there to look at eyes, dentists, and they help build a taller, a workshop with a gallery. You can see when you go, if you go, I'd encourage you actually, it is a paradisical place. All the houses, as I said before, are built around the edge of the island, pretty much distant from each other. Each person sort of lives off in the jungle by themselves. That's John. Just a regular guy who, like any of us, has this kind of political involvement or that one. There are a couple of different people in this room who've worked in Nicaragua or other places, although the U.S. never funded the upper class in Nicaragua that won that revolution, that won the election and pushed out the Sandinistas long ago. The U.S. never really funded much of anything there, but different church groups and NGOs in the U.S. have gone on funding all kinds of different activities in Nicaragua. I was talking with Barbara Woods, who's sitting over here, who goes down through one of a church group to do work on public health in Nicaragua. John's last book, I started toward that and then stopped, was on all of the different groups, dozens and dozens of American groups, most of them church groups, that fund specific social development activities, public health, building hospitals, bringing doctors. Barbara was helping dig latrines, right? Kind of things where people from here, people from our generation, go down there and do the kind of contact between peoples that we would all see as healthy in a way, things that we would hope would happen. Maybe you wouldn't have supported a communist revolution, but then maybe you wouldn't have wanted your government funding guns from thugs to try to overthrow that revolution. One of the hard parts about living here in the first world is our government represents our large corporations and funds, if not revolutions, certainly dictatorships, like Musharraf's. My work, some of you know me, my work has been in India for most of my adult life. And I've always wondered why it was that India, the largest democracy in the world, right, the only one larger than this one, the largest, why the U.S. always favored Pakistan, which was always a military dictatorship, over India, where you can buy generals off pretty well, and it's harder to buy off a democracy. And India didn't always vote with us in the UN, so I guess it isn't democracy that counts so often for our government, but other things. But some people, like John or Barbara, can go down and work in another country, can bring them things, can make that human interaction different than Negroponte's. Then we're still sending Negroponte out to do our bidding. Our government is. We'll be electing a new Congress soon. We hope they'll be better than the one that's there. We hope they won't be going to war stupidly. Some of us hope they just won't be going to war in the rest of the world. Each of us, though, because this wasn't a heroic figure who any of you heard of. He's just an intelligent person who worked in a university and was interested in what was happening in the world and made his own daily life, his own interaction count, the way each of us tries to do by contributing to this institution or buying a raffle ticket to go with that. We have a place when we vote, when we act with who we contribute to, who we support, what we learn about the world. Here are a bunch of gringos trying to see what the fields look like in Nicaragua, in Solentiname. So John went down, got involved in Cardinal's project long after Cardinal had abandoned it, and did his little gringo part to help that painters collective develop. And we get the results of it in terms of the paintings that come back here. The paintings you see on the walls around you, the one on my far left in the middle is priced at $400, but the rest of the paintings in this room are priced at less than $200, some of them around $100, some less than $100. All hand-painted, all from that growth of that collective in Solentiname, Nicaragua. Not political in any way in terms of their subject matter, just a little picture of paradise. My cousin Beverly has 3 Haitian paintings on her wall. They're a little different style than this. They're a Haitian style. They're quite handsome. But every time I think of our relationship with Haiti, how the people in Haiti live to survive, I'm thinking I put that painting on my wall and all I could think of was how difficult and painful it is in Haiti. Well, I don't know much about Haiti. I don't know what's going on there. When I tell people I'm going to India, because I go to do research, and they'll look at me and they'll say, how can you go? They're so poor. And it's true, there's a lot of poverty there. I sort of answer back, well, a lot of poverty in Chicago and rural Iowa. We live with a lot of poverty all over the world. I can do it in India because I don't go to the poorest parts, and I work in a positive way with people, and I can see things because I understand it growing and getting better. When you work with a place, when you learn a little bit about their history, when you realize the little increments of progress they're making, when you think of the ego that goes with, we are now a democracy in Nicaragua. We don't have a dictator who tells us what to do. We can sell paintings. We can make this socialism grow, or we can vote for another party. You see people growing. Like I said, I don't know what's happening in Haiti. I'll just hear the bad things on the news. But it is useful to pick a place out in the world where bad things are going on. Try to understand what your government is doing about them. Ask the political candidates as they come by to shake your hand what they're doing about them. And you stop losing hope, and you start being able to make steps with those people toward a better world. John did some of that going to Nicaragua, certainly. When you buy these paintings, I'm telling you a little bit about what they mean. John's book would tell you a lot more. So, not from just a beautiful place where people are living in great poverty, but from a place where people are living in poverty and climbing out of it slowly. Barbara was saying, it's so beautiful. Look how lush it is. This is our idea of paradise, right? Just lush jungle. And having spent a week there on the islands, it is lush. Some of these pictures bring that out. Proyecto Casa Taller. This was a little painting people did for John of the workshop he helped build. Again, using the money they did from selling these paintings, they brought down cement and wood and some designs, and the people on the island, with their own sweat, built this large workshop on the main island. The cooperative keeps paintings there for sale, and as I said, the boats from the big hotels can stop, and people can even buy some of them. There's the largest miniature painting I've ever seen. It's a picture of them building their own place on the island. It's a picture. So this picture is the whole picture which stands in the middle of the workshop itself. And down in the lower left-hand corner, there's that little bit, Comandante Juan. John was 6'4", and so he was taller than most Nicaraguans. I'm as tall as most Nicaraguans. One nice thing about most of the world is I'm regular height. It's in America we have these giant people. Here a set of the artists. A few gringos mixed up with artists whose work you see on the walls around you. As I said, most of them are women, not all of them, but most of the most active artists are women. All right, so when Carly stands up, you can tell how much taller John is. One little island smaller than the ISU campus. And that is a kind of paradise, as long as your belly is full and you can enjoy it. If it isn't, of course, it's not. Okay, how do the paintings come out? When the artists describe the paintings, they talk about realism. And one of the interesting things about that lineup of artists we just saw was the way that artists never stand still. Everybody's always sort of doing the next thing. Everyone wants to stand out a little bit, get their own little part in. It's amazing how common creativity is. People just have to make lots of paintings. You'll see 2 or 3 paintings by each of the artists here. They share a lot of qualities, and you'll see them quickly. But you start looking at them. The reason I was saying find the one you like most, many people wonder how to judge art as if it were some fantastic thing that only special people can learn the magic secret of. You judge art the same way you judge popular music. You know the ones you like, the ones you don't. You probably know what you like about them. That's how you judge art. You look at a bunch of things and you find out which one you like more, and you start seeing the things that move you, and what counts as what moves you. All right. As I said, they talk about the things in terms of realism. They want a picture that shows just what they're looking at. All of this looks very abstract and patterned, very simplified. But if we come in close on one, as much as those are repeated patterns, they distinguish different kinds of trees very specifically. If you know enough botany, you would say, this is one of these, and that's one. To me, this is a palm tree, and that looks like a ficus of some kind. I don't know enough names. But they really, each one stands for a particular variety, and they can tell you which they are. If you see animals, they're specific animals. They're not done with photographic precision. They're done with a kind of concrete, this is the animal that is. This is the tree that is. When you look at the jungle, all those myriad things going on, all those different kinds of leaf patterns, that's the richness they're giving you, but they resolve it into patterns, rhythms. The flash picture is good because it isolates some of the leaves, and you see how someone can start thinking toward an abstract pattern to represent a particular plant. Most teenagers know how to identify a marijuana plant when it's on a t-shirt or a back porch. I've studied in India a lot, and this is a style in a way that will come up all over the world. Here's the same thing. This is an Indian manuscript painting from the 17th century, but if you look at the trees, they're doing just the same kind of thing. right? They're resolving them. So this is a palm tree, and that's a mango, and this is an areca nut tree, and so on. Specific named varieties. Anyone who lives there knows what it is. Carly, my wife, pointed out earlier on one of the paintings on this wall over here, there's a rock with some little figures, like stick figures, scraped out onto it. And she reminded me while we were there, one of the islands in the Salento chain has some rock engravings on it. So it's not photographic realism, but it is realism in the way of conceptual. Here is a particular place, this belongs to this island, this belongs to that kind of tree or that animal. Most of the animals come in pairs, couples. That's how you get more animals. Okay, so what I wanted to do was two kinds of things. One, bring you back into that history a little bit that we're still part of. I mean, if Daniel Ortega has been elected after all these years, having been out of power all these years, but stuck in there with his hopes for a socialist revolution, and he's back, not by force of arms this time, but through the democracy that he helped install. Right? If he's working for socialism, things take a long time. We tend to use the word revolution as if a coup was a revolution. Somebody wins the war and they won the revolution. Social revolutions are the changing of a whole way of life, a whole economy. If we move from the kind of capitalism we have now to socialism or some other form. They're still in the midst of that there. Right? Those of us who watched our government interfere with what they were trying to do 30 years ago, 20 years ago, can see that still going on, still trying to work toward what they'd like to have. The same way if you look back at the U.S., at what we were 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, not just changes in rock and roll styles, disco came and went, it'll be back, but also different ways of approaching capitalism, trying to humanize it, the idea of collectives, and there they are back in Nicaragua still working towards something else. And my point about these paintings is that as you look at each one, as you find one you might like, as you have a chance to purchase one, they'll be here until January 2nd, but for a modest price. You can get an original painting by the artists of Salentaname. They are connected with that development towards socialism that John Brentlinger was going down to visit, that the American government tried to interrupt, but the different American NGOs have tried to, not necessarily the socialism, but certainly the democracy down there, that the U.S. also hampered. Remember, Somoza was our dictator, right? And it was the leftovers from his army, the Contras, that the U.S. government paid to reinvade. That history is going on. We're still part of it. It's not just something that happened somewhere else. We are the most powerful country in the world. Each of us has very little power specifically here. By joining a party, by connecting with a particular political candidate, you have a role too. I do too. It isn't just John, but I brought him up because he gave his life to things like this, and he enjoyed his life, and he got to go down there and enjoy the jungle too. So, I'm going to stop the lecture at this point, but I'm going to be in the room, and if you'd like to talk about individual paintings, I'd love to. But take a chance, walk around, see which one you like most. You don't have to buy one. I mean, it's just an interesting way of learning what your own taste is like. I will take questions, though, about what I've been saying, if anybody has any. Yeah?
How much of the money from each painting specifically goes to Sierra?
10% of this is going to the union because of just, to pay for the room and the overhead here. The rest of it all will go back to Nicaragua. The people in Western Mass who have this collective that's carrying on this work, they just donate their own time, and the money goes back there. I'm doing the same. So anything you spend on these will go, pretty much all of it, right back to the artists themselves. Which is what they try to do at Worldly Goods, right? There are different groups, or if you buy fair trade coffee, there are attempts in different ways for a global economic exchange that does give back to people who grow things and build things in the rest of the world some of the value it's worth. Different than our trade with China, let's say. Better. And any other questions?
Do they call themselves a school Or is that you and John from outside?
I'm using the word just because we use it for a bunch of artists who have a lot in common. No. And there isn't, right, a school of artists is like a school of fish, a group. They share a style. They developed it pretty much themselves, but they had people come in and out. One of the interesting things you'll see as you look at the paintings, the woman on the far right in the picture, the black and white picture of the artists, Jan Wallerstein, is a figurative artist in Amherst, Massachusetts, and she did a workshop with them on doing figure studies. Well, you look at these people, they're mostly stick figures and very flattened out. Everything in this style is very patterned and flattened out on the surface. And while we were down there, there was a discussion among us, well, should you be bringing that to them? I mean, their style is flattened out and patterned. It's not got perspective worked into it or a lot of modeling. But they wanted it. And as you walk around, you'll see some things that are particularly flat. You'll see someplace, this painting in the middle by Aureliano, the bigger one in the very middle there. She has painted a little wash over the backmost plants. So instead of being patterned on the surface, there's a little bit of aerial perspective and they fall back a little bit. The artists are obviously trying to bring in perspective and at the same time keep their flat patterns. They're playing back and forth with the two things. So they go on developing different kinds of things and they'll look at different styles. And you will find similar styles to this in other places in Nicaragua. I've seen things like this in Costa Rica. Art travels very fast, and something sells, somebody else tries to do it right away. So it's not peculiar to them. But these come from those artists, and as I said, they're going on evolving in an interesting way. You might just look for these ways they play with what's flat and what's in perspective. That's the biggest sort of ongoing formal thing. Yes?
Which one's your favorite?
Which one's my favorite? Well, I've shown you details out of mine. Mine's at home. Well, I mean, the most impressive painting to me is that one in the center over there. It's the one that's cost $400 on that list. As I said, most of them cost $150, $75, $90. If you look at it and compare it with the other ones, you'll see pretty quickly why it's got more time that's been given to it. It's a little more control, a little more attempt to make very fine detail. It's also larger. In fact, if you go to any art, if you're an artist and you've had the enjoyable thing of dealing with galleries, it's by size, it's by figures, it's by whether the figures are clothed or not. They're real practical things as to what sells and what doesn't. But in this case, there's just a lot more care taken and a lot more control over the individual details. And then I really do like, I've got a painting by the same artist, so I probably am used to that particular woman, but that fuzzing out of those things in the background, that's sort of a neat new thing. So it's like going up to your favorite Toyota and saying, "Oh, this one's got one of those." Got a little extra detail.
You may have said this before, but what is there an average age of the artists, or are they older people or younger people?
I would bet that the life expectancy on Salento Nami is under 60 years. That's a guess. The infant mortality must be high. I mean, they're doing better than a lot of people in Nicaragua, and this painting is certainly helping them to live better lives than the subsistence they were doing before. And they now have a full-time teacher year-round where they can paint. So they're improving their lives, but they're pretty isolated. They don't have a doctor living locally and so on. Most of these paintings are done by young women, and the ones that were lined up there, the ones who heard about the workshop going on and came down to do it, they were all in their 20s and 30s.
Oh, they're mostly women.
They were all women, the one we saw. In fact, I think almost all the artists working in this...
There were a few men.
There were.
They just didn't want to hang around with us.
There's that gender thing. Start hanging around with the women, your buddies will think you're going to be a painter.
300 people on that island.
Most of them work most of the days, but then the women were artists. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
There's, as you say, one painting that has sort of a spiritual bent to it. Originally, as the collective began under the tutelage of this,
Ernesto Cardinal.
It wasn't the priest who guided it, but
Yeah.
he basically organized the people. Did the earlier ones have more spiritual flavor, or have they always been sort of day-to-day life?
I don't know about that. I come into this sort of late because of my friend's political activities, and we went down with him to see things and to work on the repainting of the school, and unfortunately or fortunately, depending on things, the paint wasn't there when we got there, so we got to hang around the island and didn't have to work at all. There is, as I said, there's a book around, which is the gospel according to the artists of Salentaname. And so whether or not they certainly are, Christian religion is very important down there, and I don't know exactly which sect or what. Cardinal is a Catholic, and that was what he was organizing around. But there are different sects of Christianity down there. I'm not sure why they did or didn't do the figurative painting. There is one in the back. The style obviously suits landscape much more than figures. Figures take a lot more time and to look good, maybe. I don't know. If I spend more time doing this, well, like I said, I just learned about that book, and I ordered a copy today. So I'd like to know more. It is sort of fascinating in the world, the things that pop up and run by you. Now you all know this word Salentaname to go with the word Nicaragua you've known a long time. Google it up, see what you can find out. And it'd be wonderful to see what that book of pictures is widely spread, probably during the war, to let people know about the people down there, that they were Christians we were attacking. But isn't that interesting? Our government, the one government in the world convicted in a court, in a world court, not some backroom thing or by one of our enemies, but by our allies, in the World Court in The Hague, of terrorism, our government. Yeah.
The island of, those are the islands of Salentaname, but weren't we on a particular island there? And
We were on this one. The one that I showed
they
you.
each had different names, so didn't
Yeah.
I forgot the name.
Isla Mancaron. That's the biggest one. And that's the one that has that taller, that workshop. Some of the small ones are uninhabited. There are actually 35, and there are 10 on this map, but the bigger ones. Okay, well, let me turn the lights back on and take a look at things. We have some cookies and punch. Please enjoy them. And if anybody would like me to talk about or talk with them about any of the particular paintings, I would love to. Thank you.